expensive Kevlar and American weapons. We have images of them training these people in how to create bombs. So yeah, you mentioned George Soros and his, humanitarian NGOs. Well, there's actually NGOs out there, and they have websites, and Syria has captured shipments of their stuff to these insurgents, and they include walkie-talkies, and they've captured so many shipments of weapons, including Israeli weapons. So in the media, you hear things like, oh, the US is discussing whether or not it will arm the insurgency. Actually, it's been armed since the beginning.
Well, that's right. They admit in Jordan, this is even been in the BBC and even Associated Press, there's U.S. troops right on the border at these camps arming them and then spilling them in. And then little CIA Anderson Cooper, who admits he's CIA, gets up and goes, I'm liberal. Oh, help everybody. Oh, help them. I mean, it's so... People think if somebody has a limp wrist that war is suddenly trendy. And that's all a camouflage with Anderson Cooper, that whole I'm a sweetie cake act. Oh, we've really got to help the protesters. I mean, it is so sick. Well, Syrian girl, we've put your Twitter up on screen if folks want to contact you. From what I've seen, though, it looks like the tide is starting to turn against this Western-backed al-Qaeda revolution, and that things are really starting to reverse. Is that fair to say from your contacts in Syria?
I definitely agree. I'm still cautious of what might be put against Syria next. I feel like they want to start creating a civil war. So, the way that they create a civil war is they continuously bomb one side and then the other until even, one person is idiotic enough to think, oh, actually, I was bombed by the other side. And that's all it takes to turn a fake civil war into a real civil war. So I feel this is their next step in Syria. This is what they're going to try to do. But I feel, we're not going to go for it. We've already, Syria's already basically defeated the insurgency, the FSA. It's just these
cells
of bomb makers that it now has to
that's like 6 years ago. It was even in the British news. They caught SAS dressed up like Wahhabis driving around shooting Shiites and Shiite police trying to get a civil war going in Basra. It's full spectrum dominance. If you're going to be somewhere, you've got to be able to say there's the war. And so the bankers fund the terrorist and fund the insurrection as a pretext to be there. And now they've said they're going to start bombing Damascus, and then the government's got to clamp down to stop that. And then they can say, oh, look, the government's authoritarian. This is pure manipulation. And we'll continue to track it and watch it from here. Be safe. Syrian girl, thank you so much for spending time with us.
If I may make one last sentence,
sure.
I just want to say that there's a lot of talk in Syria that the emails, the so-called Assad emails are not really his, and the names even on the email are not true. I just wanted to just say that because otherwise I'll regret not saying it.
Oh, that's probably the case. That's probably the case. They probably put INFOWARS in there to, go after us. I know they've done similar things to us in the past. Who knows? I just saw that in the City Morning Herald. I don't know if you saw it a few weeks ago, and it was like, INFOWARS.com and the emails. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time the establishment's done stuff like that. Well, listen, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Well, I was only going to go for about 15 minutes, but wow, amazing in-depth interview, not sound bites there, with the lady that goes for safety by Syrian girl. And she comes from one of the former ruling class families who didn't actually like Assad's father. So there you go. But they don't want to see their country bombed, and with all those love bombs that Obama likes to drop that Hillary's calling for, carpet bombing the country to protect the protesters, the al-Qaeda. And again, if you don't like the fact that I don't like al-Qaeda, I don't care. I'm not for al-Qaeda. And I know nowadays in America that's seen as extremist, that's seen as bad. I don't want to ship guns to the Mexican drug lords like the White House does. I don't want to fund al-Qaeda. I just want freedom. I'm not for cancer viruses and the vaccines. I'm a bad guy. I'm an extremist. I want freedom. I don't want to devalue the dollar. I'm a bad guy again. Another bad guy is Billy Corgan, founder of the Smashing Pumpkins. He's probably even more prolific when it comes to the fact he's one of the greatest living songwriters. So many of the big hits you hear, Billy Corgan wrote. And a great political mind. I found out a few years ago from Eric Mancow Muller, who he's friends with, that Billy's a listener. And then I learned he was coming to South by Southwest and that we ought to talk to each other through Mancow. And hooked up with him 2 different nights with him and his girlfriend and really got a chance to get to know him. Amazing person and a very impressive interview, as you're about to see. Certainly a newsmaker. So all you PrisonPlanet.tv viewers, be sure and get this out to everybody you know. And Lord willing, as it's always up to God, we'll see you back on the radio tomorrow, 11 a.m. Central, 12 noon Eastern, and then back tomorrow night. I'll be here, InfoWars Nightly News. We've had our pit stop, and we've got our contest for 2 new reporters running. You've got a month until April 30th to get that in, and check all that out at InfoWars.com as well. The video's up on our YouTube channel. That's it for the InfoWars Nightly News. I give you now the special report. Billy Corgan in studio, over an hour-long interview. Tonight, we have a special guest in studio. Billy Corgan, the founder of Smashing Pumpkins, is in studio with us to talk about the media, music, what's happening right now, and what he sees in the future. Billy, great to have you in studio with us.
Thank you, Alex. Happy to be here.
Wow, you're here for South by Southwest. How are you liking it?
It's a little crazy, as you know, as an Austin person. It's all of a sudden all the beard people showed up. The trendies, as you call them, right? Lots of trendies showed up with beards and white Vans.
I did notice that, and like pastel pinks and greens, yeah. Prancing.
I didn't see that, but I did see a lot of people like this with the cell phones, you know. So.
Oh, and they walk out in front of traffic?
Yeah.
Well, it's good to have you here. Tell us about the speech you were here giving, and you had a little run-in with Al Gore.
I did. Well, technically speaking, I made the president, former vice president, wait for me, which was pretty funny. It's a little payback for something from the past. Yeah, I was here, conference, social media and how it's changing the business models. In essence, it's essentially revolutionizing the business models because the consumer's in essence talking back. And so it's about where the music industry has sort of gotten it wrong in the last 10 years. When you know, with the rise of Napster, the music business kind of covered their ears and thought it was all going to go away, and it's really hollowed out the music business in many ways. And so there is a movement there that needs to be headed. I'm not saying I'm the head of it, but I'm part of a core group of artists that wants to come back to where artistic expression and integrity is sort of at the core of the music business. It was a good business model for a long time. There were a lot of flaws, but essentially a lot of great work was created. And now you talk to most people, particularly 20-year-olds, they're just not very connected to their music because the corporate aspect of it and the message behind it has really alienated a lot of people, and they've turned to other things. They've turned to video games. They turned to, but you know, music no longer has that sort of special place in the culture.
It has, you know, seemed to lose that real rebel quality that you saw across the board in music just 20 years ago. We were talking about that at dinner last night. How did that happen?
Well, I think anytime you have a corporate interest becomes the dominating theme. I mean, it's a central theme of what you talk about in your broadcasts, where corporate interest has taken over America. I mean, you can go back to the founding fathers of America. They were working their own corporate interests. I mean, it had a lot to do with the decisions they made in Philadelphia in the late 1700s, but it was balanced against a set of constitutional rights and the idea that, well, this particular model, a free model, a great society is going to yield a greater result. And as you like to point out many times, I mean, America was an incredibly successful experiment for a long time. It evolved. And then somewhere along the way, we've kind of just gone like that, where corporate interest has completely taken over our political structure, and it's also taken over our musical structure, where you have, I mean, yes, it's a business, as somebody once said, it is a music business, but when it is the prime driving force, well, then of course you're going to get into things that are salacious and in essence overtly negative to the culture because they're just serving a particular interest. And there is a point where we all have to be responsible for our community standard. We all have to be responsible for the messages we put out. I mean, I've said lots of crazy things, done a lot of crazy things, but I've always had an intention in the back of my mind that something I was doing or the collective amount of things that I was doing were going to help somebody somewhere. If your complete intention is to do nothing but profit on the backs of others, well, then you know where that's going to go.
You mentioned the founders, and I think you really brought up a point that I've thought about a lot but never articulated, but reading their writings and what they did, they were inventors, they were really into knowledge, and sure, they were corporate businessmen, but they were really into the fact that we're so confident, we're so smart, we're not intimidated by other people having freedom. They were kind of in and talked about this wild experiment of freedom. And you look at the corporate structures globally today, they are scared to death of any freedom. And so they're stifling that. And I think that's really pretty simple, but at the same time, it's complex.
Well, I think from a political standpoint, anywhere where you see dissent being stifled, where is the fear? I mean, or should I say, why is the fear there? Most people I talk to that would say have a problem with the government, they don't sit around and talk about anarchy or overthrowing the government. They just want to see a government that represents their sort of community value. And I'm not necessarily one side or the other. You know, I've got people in my family that are total right-wing Republicans. Some of them are probably even racist. But they at least have a particular opinion that they're coming from that is rooted in their own belief system. When all you have is corporate interest driving something, well, then it's got nothing to do with belief. It's about looking at you and saying, how can I strip this man or this woman or this family of their resources? And that particular aspect is sort of haunting to us as Americans, because even if we were raised in propaganda, which you and I probably were, we were at least raised to believe America's a great country, it represents these values. You know, we freed the slaves, we helped stop the Holocaust. You know, we grew up with a sense of personal ethic about what our country represents.
The corporate globalism is so cold-blooded, it's so robotic.
Well, yeah. And I mean, you address it, you know, with great frequency. And I think I use that word again. There's sort of a haunting feeling. It's like I get it. Like I get you want to make money, you know. I get you want to sell me something. But it's when it's at the expense of my community, when it's at the expense of the values of the people around me. And, you know, people don't even talk to their neighbors. And they're all so locked into this, we talked about it last night, kind of a narcoleptic state where the TV is enough or the computer is enough. That's a scary thing, you know, and so there is a connection there between kind of stifling dissent. You know, what did Obama say coming in? I want to run this great open government. Transparent was, I believe, the word they used. And now you've seen where they go out of their way to stifle dissent.
It's the most closed government.
Right. But what I say from an artistic point of view, and as somebody who's been in the media and at the top levels of media, and of course I know plenty of things that go on behind the scenes, why are we so afraid of that dissent? You know, what is the problem? I mean, isn't that the point of a democracy? You're supposed to have a kind of a riotous debate about who's right. It should be an uncomfortable conversation. There should be kind of that's the whole point.
Exactly. They're always saying, well, you can have your free speech as long as it's not uncomfortable.
Or as long as it's 300 feet down the road, away from where the limos go in the back door, you know.
But it is the uncomfortable speech. That's what's really important.
Yes, and that's why I appreciate what you're doing. I think you raise a lot of points that are uncomfortable, but they're necessary towards the greater dialogue about where our country is at the moment and where it's going. And of course, as alternative media, which you know you're a pioneer in, as it reveals a different narrative than we've been sold, there's an awareness and awakening that goes on because you start looking at history and go, okay, wait a second, that thing I was told about this, maybe that's not so true. And then you start looking at things from a different point of evaluation. I think the biggest mistake we all make is trying to find a form of absolutism. There is no one truth. There is no one definitive black and white answer. It is